We now turn to a fireside chat where experience meets perspective and insights flow through conversation. For that, I invite speaker Mr. Rajeshwar Rao, former Deputy Governor RBI, and our moderator for this session, Ms. Lata Venkatesh, Executive Director, CNBC TV 18, on the dais, please. Round of applause for our speakers, please.
Thank you very much, Bombay Chamber of Commerce, as well as Mr. Rajeshwar Rao. It's a pleasure to be speaking to anyone from Reserve Bank, especially with someone who has headed regulation. And up until yesterday, as it were, this room here, full of bankers, is brimming with questions, Mr. Rao, and much of it is what they would have liked to ask you, because I did a survey before when I was preparing for this interview. Now, the first question will obviously be what is on everyone's mind. What does the regulator think about deposits? I mean, there is this lazy answer that we all know the problem. People who are saving in bank deposits up until my father's generation are now saving through mutual funds. So the lazy answer, anyway, money is in the banking system, whether it is the mutual funds bank deposit or the individual's bank deposit, that answer is not adequate. As almost everyone in this hall know, when it is a deposit from a mutual fund, you have to keep a very high HQLA or liquidity cover because that money is fleeting. Whereas if it was a term deposit that my father kept, then the bankers would have kept perhaps, 5% or 1% of it in the form of government securities or liquidity. Clearly, the bank's profitability will be hit. So what is the regulator, or what is the regulatory way of thinking about this issue? Because banks chasing deposits is a chase that is not going away in the foreseeable future.
No, I think a short answer is that this is a problem which is here to stay. And I think there have been developments in the last decade which actually have enabled this kind of, I think it's a healthy choice for the investor at least. One is the technology has enabled easier switch between a banking asset to a financial asset in the last decade or so. Second, I think there is also a kind of sachetization of the equity market products. Products are available in smaller units, easier to invest, let us say even in options or in the equity shares. So the ability of a typical bank depositor to take risks on the equity, punt on the equity market through this is facilitated, coupled with the ability to invest into equity markets much easier, has also encouraged people to do that. Third, the wedge between the return which you're getting on deposits and what you're getting on the equity markets looks significant, and that's one reason why people would prefer diversification of their portfolio. Diversification is welcome, so that may not be a bad thing in itself. But when you put all these three trends together, what you're seeing is a situation where people are diversifying their asset portfolio from banking assets to the non-banking assets, the equities and the options, etc. So I think this, and also another point is there has been a greater amount of liquidity available in the units of mutual fund. Earlier, traditionally, the banks were attractive because bank deposits could be liquidated at short notice and you could get the cash when you wanted. That facility is also being availed of in the mutual fund segment today. So when you look at all these trends, naturally the tendency to go into diversification is happening, and that is a problem which we'll have to see. And banks will have to address this problem upfront. That is, they have to look at liability management. Traditionally, the bankers have tried to look at refining or creating products in the asset side portfolio, but the deposits, plain vanilla products have been in the play for a very long time. So maybe more attention on more liability management is also necessary. Like I said, if you want a good hot buttered toast, the asset side gives you the bread, but the liability side will give you the butter. So you need to look at both sides equally and then try to take it forward.
That point is taken, but that also takes, of course, treasury management becomes very important, liability management becomes very important. But I'm looking for solutions here. Let me first get the other side of the problem also. Asset liability management. I mean, banks, do you see a time when banks will only play retail? That is very short-term loans, probably personal loans, credit card loans, maybe auto loans, but even home loans will be a problem. Because if they do, there is a big asset liability mismatch. So, do you see banks shedding some of the traditional activities like project finance or infrastructure finance?
No, in fact, actually, I would say that going purely into retail would also be a risk, because then you're concentrating on a particular segment at the cost of the others. So I think the banks will necessarily have to maintain a diversified portfolio to minimize the risks. So that is absolutely required. So having said that, asset liability management becomes critical, and the banks will have to improve their treasury functioning to look at this new reality. Maybe you have to look at deposit products which will give you long-term sources of funds in which you can then use to invest into long-term assets.
Let us get the discussion to that. What is the long term they have? Either they have infra funds, bonds, which is 7 years, but that is tied to a specific category, or they have 1 year CDs. Do you think we now need to innovate? The regulator has to, I don't think RBI allows 3 year CDs or anything like that. Do you think rules need to be rewritten and the market has to evolve for some intermediate product between 1 year CD and 7 year infra bonds? And also, doesn't this blur the line between bank and NBFC? So first the question of longer dated CDs or some such product.
No, the long-term deposit which you talked about, the 7 year bond for infrastructure, essentially has an attraction because there are exemptions from the CRR, SLR, which has been given to those deposits. But outside of that, if the banks are raising longer-term deposits, they are not precluded from doing that. There is no bar on the banks raising deposits. So, but only thing is, because of the cost of SLR, CRR, maybe it becomes not very attractive to fund a long-term asset with those kind of resources.
It also compares very poorly with other asset classes in terms of capital gains tax. So you have to pay much more if you're going to take a longer-term deposit from a corporate who will obviously prefer equity because of the capital gains involved in the interest income. So I'm asking if, other products like a CD, like the bond market, is called for.
No, even if these instruments are allowed, I think there should not be a problem. But I think the challenge which you mentioned about the tax treatment is something real which needs to be addressed by the government. I think at a system level, we should look at symmetry in the treatment of long-term liabilities. That is one point. And the tax treatment should be similar. Like typically today, a short-term equity asset gets benefit vis-a-vis a deposit. That should actually not be considered. We should look at a symmetry in the thing. So the idea is this should actually encourage flow of long-term capital into the system, long-term resources into the system. So that's one thing which we will have to consider. And as far as investments into long-term bonds, etc. is concerned, banks already have the option of investing into long-term bonds. You have credit enhancement facilities which will support the banks in their ability to invest into bonds.
Okay. I take your point on taxes. We are, on the threshold of a budget, an upcoming budget. But the last thing you can expect in that budget is an increase in LTCG on equities. I doubt if I take a poll in this room, many people will even support it. But I can just state for the record that while I was preparing for this interview, in almost all major jurisdictions, especially, those who follow the Anglo-Saxon laws, US, UK, Germany, all income is your slab rate. Whether the capital gains is coming from equities or whether it is interest income, it is slab rate. It's only some jurisdictions like India where there is a vast difference between, LTCG on equities and interest income and LTCG on bonds. This is hardly to be expected in this budget, but a lowering of the burden on interest income would be called for, you think? If we are not in a juncture to raise rates on equity LTCG.
I'm not really competent to comment on what the budget would or would not do on this issue, and it is for the issue.
What is the structural answer?
No, but my fundamental point is we need long-term resources. The tax treatment for long-term resources, whether through the equity or through the debt, should be treated similarly so that the differentiation doesn't encourage one sector at the cost of the other. So that would be my short point on this.
Okay, at the moment there won't be listeners to that point of view because we were increasingly told in 2023, was it, when the indexation of debt was removed, that all over the world interest income is treated as income, slab rate. But they never gave year when we said LTCG is also treated as income. Obviously, we were also not interested in pushing that case at that time. It's hurting badly. Mr. Rao, let me come to the currency part. I'll revisit this issue because this is a structural issue. The currency is also getting hurt by the same thing. There has been a tidal wave of money that has gone from fixed income to equities, and at all levels of earnings growth, valuations are looking expensive because everyone is going into equities for tax saving. They're not going because of risk appetite or because of your age. Equities because it is taxed less than debt. Now, how should RBI look at the external angle itself? Until now, for the last 30 years, we were told 2% current account deficit is fine because capital flows will bridge it. Now, for the last 2 years, we have had a balance of payments outflow, which means capital outflow has been as high as current account outflow. How do we tackle this?
No, I think the uncertainty which is there on the current account and the capital flows is largely arising from the geopolitical situation. And until that settles down, I don't think we will be able to make a firm assumption of whether the capital is holding back or whether there is the capital is drying up. That's one point. And having said that, maybe there is also a need to diversify the sources of foreign capital. It's not necessary that the funds only come through the certain advanced economies. There could be other sources also of capital flows which we should be really looking at and tapping in the times to come. So I think both these aspects will have to be factored in. But I think we need not be too perturbed about the lack of portfolio flows coming in at this point in time, but we will certainly have to see that this uncertainty which is clouding the geopolitical outlook at the global level gets settled sooner rather than later, which will then help the situation to stabilize.
I am told by finance experts that geopolitics is one reason, but there is a earnings issue as well. Valuations are way higher than earnings growth simply because every saver has become an investor. It is a blind tidal wave going into equities, which keeps, we very proudly say the foreigners are losing and the domestic investor is in, but there is a cost to it. And the currency is showing it today, 91.73 at its worst, just before close. So is this, has the Reserve Bank and government to seriously think of opening more doors of capital coming into the country? They've done so. ECBs have become easier, and you probably started the process, but it got finished after your term ended. You think more doors need to be opened?
I think we have to explore all alternatives. They should not be off the table. Opening of doors for ECB is one segment, perhaps longer term capital from alternate sources is another. So we have to be more flexible in the way we look at foreign capital coming in and the directions from which the capital flows in. Too much of focus on the earlier segment which was coming from a particular set of countries may not be really very successful in the times to come, at least in the immediate future. Maybe the capital would resume once the uncertainty gets settled, but till then we have to be having our options open for alternate sources.
Withholding tax?
Huh?
Withholding tax? We are in budget mode, that's why I'm asking.
No, I have no comments on that particular. Yeah.
Well, I'm just looking at opening all doors for foreign capital. Okay, let me come back to the major banking issue that we are discussing. How are you looking at the long term? What is, I don't want to say end game, what is the next game for banks? There are enough challenges from fintechs who are able to do a last mile connect more effectively, and as more and more of India starts using GPay and UPI and probably Paytm, they're leaving behind a digital footprint which fintechs will use perhaps faster. You have big tech like Google Pay. At the moment, of course, they're not making any money on their GPay. They can't even store the data. But they may fast be looking at ways in which they can store data in other forms. So what is the game for banks? They seem to be attacked on the long-term side by funding problem and on the short-term side by the more nimble competition.
No, I think technology has changed the way we look at banking and financial services. So when I have to look at the banking sector maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line, I'm actually looking at the entire gamut of financial services because there was a previous question which you mentioned about blurring of lines between NBFCs and banks. I think that's also likely to happen. If you look at the last 10 years, post-AQR, the banks were a bit reticent in lending. The space was occupied by the NBFCs. NBFCs have grown quite significantly in the last few years. Growth of technology enables fintechs and maybe the big techs to do the disintermediation of banking services which were hitherto done within in-house in the bank, but it could be now done through apps or through other fintech entities. So when we look at the situation going forward, we are going to see a situation where the banks will have to compete on the liability side and maybe on the asset side with non-banking financial companies, with the fintechs, and with the big techs. That's one. And another growth area, if you look at it, is the growth of private credit. I think that's also something significant which is being seen in the advanced economies. India, it's not very large at this point in time, but going forward, we would look at banks, NBFCs, and private credit as three major segments. I was just looking at the Financial Stability Board's review of NBFIs just a couple of days back. If you look at it, the total financial assets in the global system is around $500 trillion. The share of NBFCs is more than 50% today. The bank share is 38%. So banks are much smaller than, at a global level, are much smaller than the NBFIs.
Non-bank financial entities.
So that is a trend which is being witnessed globally. Then we are seeing the rise of the private credit. And all these in some ways also arise out of the regulatory actions. See, like the argument they give for the private credit is that the private credit comes in because the regulations enable or force the banks to actually lend on collateral-based lending. They are lending into safe areas because they have deposits. The depositors' interest needs to be protected. So the riskier lending is being taken by the other players, the NBFCs or maybe the private credit. And that's what is actually witnessing. But again, the flip side is the private credits are also funded through bank loans or investments. So this, at a system level, the risk doesn't go away. The risk goes from one segment, the banking segment, to the other segments. So the challenge, as I see it for the regulator, is to ensure that the overall risk in the system is minimized or managed efficiently so that the financial stability is maintained at all points in time.
Well, you're just a few months away from Reserve Bank. Do you think our private credit is a source of worry for the regulator?
May not be at this point in time, but if it expands significantly, that is going to be an issue.
Okay.
And also, I think if you look at it, the NBFCs are also largely dependent on bank funds to a great extent to fund their assets. So the interlinkage between the NBFC and the banks is already there to a great extent. But if the private credit also grows, the interlinkage will happen there. Then I think we need to look at the interlinkages more closely and ensure that the system at an aggregate level remains stable. I think that will be the challenge.
Okay. Yes. Let me address the issue of NBFCs. This is startling, sir, the data that you have put on the table, that globally, NBFCs account for much more credit than do banks. What you said, 40 trillion compared to 60 trillion? Or?
No, it's 250 to 260 trillion is the rough number for the NBFIs, and I think the banks are around 190 trillion.
Okay. Okay. How do you see the next game for NBFCs in India in that case? Do you see that kind of growth? The impression I get from the regulator is that when an NBFC grows very large, the regulator gets worried. I mean, already the upper tier regulations have come in. Would you coax them to be a bank? Then that flies in the face of what you are saying. Are you okay with them growing as NBFCs? Today's largest NBFC, I mean, private sector NBFC, I'm not counting the large government NBFCs, Bajaj Finance is about 4.62 trillion when they announced numbers in September. And that makes them the fifth largest private bank. They're growing at 22%. Kotak is the fourth largest at the moment private sector bank. They are growing at 15%, at least last number, which means in 2 years, Bajaj Finance will be the fourth largest private bank, if it is a bank. So do you think, how is the regulator looking at it? Are you okay with the NBFC growth as it is?
No, I think that is something which the regulator will have to take a call sooner or later. As I said, the concerns about interlinkages, too big to fail or too big to, I mean, are some things which they will have to look at it from a macro perspective. In case of banks, when you look at very significantly large-scale banks, you have the additional norms in terms of the DSIP, capital surcharges, etc., so that the bigger banks are better capitalized. In the NBFC, we have the scale-based regulation where we categorize a certain segment of NBFCs in the upper layer who are subjected to a higher degree of regulation and regulatory prescriptions. There is an empty layer called the NBFC apex level. NBFC apex level, that is empty at this point.
There is no one at this point.
Yes. So if tomorrow the entity becomes so big that there is a cause for concern, it could be put in that level and then regulated at the higher pedestal as compared to the other NBFC. So that option is available for the regulator, but that's a call which the regulator will have to take, taking all the factors into account.
So you're saying that the growth of NBFCs at this pace doesn't worry you, but do you see Indian NBFCs reaching the state you are saying globally, overtaking the growth of banks?
Of course, one caveat I must say that when we look at the NBFIs, the credit-based NBFIs is 76 trillion, not out of the 260. Okay. They also include what we call as mutual funds.
Fair
so
enough.
If you took mutual funds and NBFCs together, it's about 140 trillion. We are still not as big as the banking segment. So right now there is some way to go. So we have room to breathe at this point, let us say.
What is the view on bank licenses? I'm quoting a recent interview I did with Bajaj Finance, with Sanjeev Bajaj. And his point was that they have been denied a conglomerate license, banking license, or they will be denied because they are seen as conglomerates. Now, his point is, he gives this entire data dump to RBI. And AI will now allow RBI to get interconnected lending, like that. So, do you think we should start, don't take a decision tomorrow, but we should start thinking in terms of banking licenses for conglomerates?
No, I think this was an issue covered by the internal working group on ownership and governance in banks way back in 2020. One of their recommendations was on this issue of industrial houses. There was a lot of pushback on that, so that issue is being examined, but a final call has not been taken. That is as far as the industrial house being given a bank license. Having said that, we already have an enabling framework for licensing of universal banks in terms of the entry point criteria. There is a process where you have a committee to look at it, recommend, and then the RBI takes a call. There is also a criteria for allowing SFBs to come into play. And we also have a transition path for the SFBs to become universal banks. In fact, my view, that is a good path because you start small, set yourself up, get operationally experienced, and then grow into a full-fledged universal bank. I think that's a good model to follow.
But certainly one person has shown the way.
Yes,
they have become a universal bank.
Yes.
So you think that you can expect more such small finance banks?
We have to wait for the licenses to come in. But having said that, we are in a situation where we have a large number of banking entities. I think in the previous panel, they talked about the fact that despite Japan or UK being much smaller, they have a large number of banks at the... So we need more of consolidation and expansion in size of the existing banks in India. I think that's something which is, because size actually enables the banks to fund a larger exposure, and once you have a certain critical size, growth becomes that much more easier.
Yep.
Say SBI growing at 10% is adding a new private sector bank every year into its portfolio. So I think consolidation is something which will be required. Along with consolidation, there is also a requirement of capital and liquidity in the various financial markets, because that is a concomitant requirement for the banks to grow. So I think these will be the three critical ingredients which we will need to look at in the times to come. And coming to consolidation, when I look at it, in the public sector's bank space, we had 27 public sector banks in 1999, now we have 12. And the government, I hear news reports saying that the government is planning to consolidate a few more, so we can see what would be the announcement. We'll have to wait for that. But that increases the number of large banks. Doesn't exclude, give them the opportunity to raise capital, that those constraints which are laid down in the statute still remain for them. Then when we look at another segment, that is the regional rural banks, there has been a significant amount of consolidation. You looked at 196 RRBs in 99, now you have over 28. Private banks also have gradually got merged, but private banks have greater flexibility in raising capital or consolidating, because that option is available to them based on the management call which they can take. Consolidation is also required in the urban cooperative bank sector, because there are a large number of small players. I think that is a key challenge in the banking space. Consolidation may also be required in the NBFC sector, because we have almost 9,300 NBFCs and quite a few who are not registered, because when I looked at some of the past data, we had something like 37,000 applications for certificate of registration in 1997 when the act was amended. But we have only 9,300. So I don't know how many of them are not. So I think that's something which we will have to look at: consolidation in the NBFC sector, consolidation of the urban cooperative bank. Because again, banking is becoming technology intensive. It requires a lot of investments. It requires a lot of capital. So consolidated entities would be better placed to, get the gains out of the growth story.
I get
of
your point.
India.
So we have only 3 minutes, so I'll have to get the point which I was dying to include. Foreign banks. In 2004, there was the Reserve Bank rule which said, that was the time when HSBC tried to take over Axis, and Reserve Bank said that we will give a 5-year window, and thereafter we will consider whether we will allow foreign banks to have a full play. And then, of course, the Lehman crisis happened, and that game plan never worked. But now we have two very big entities taking large stakes in Indian banks. We have one example in the hall itself, Yes Bank, and we have RBL as well, 20%, 25% coming in. But they stall at 25 because beyond that, voting rights are not given. These are large, widely held entities. Do you think the time has come to allow them remove the voting rights cap? Now, foreign capital, we need capital. And that foreign capital will balk if you tell them that we are not going to give you voting rights commensurate with your ownership. So two things. First of all, should we go after foreign banks, allowing them to take over or invest more in India, become large in India? And secondly, should we remove this voting right cap? I know it's a government question or an RBI question, but what would the regulator say?
No, I think we have created a system today where the banks are fairly robust and resilient and quite, attractive for a foreign investor to come in. And with the strong growth story which we are having at this point in time, banking sector should be an attractive investment destination. So I don't think we need to go after entities to come in. That is one point. But if entities come in, we should not be too negative on that point.
But this voting rights does...
But voting right is something which has actually come as a sequel to the kind of historical baggage which we had. In the 1940s, we had a large number of bank failures, largely because of promoter-related nexus which they had with the banks. So voting rights have been consciously dispersed in 1949. I think at that point it was 1%. Now over a period we have brought it down to 26%. But that limit, we'll have to see whether that needs to be amended. If it becomes a constraint, then I think the entities who are involved will have to represent to the regulator, and then if regulator engages with the government and they take a call, that will be the final outcome. So I cannot really second guess what will be happening at this point in time, but I think we should be flexible to allowing the foreign investments to come in into the banking sector.
The Reserve Bank governor was quite forthright in the press conference saying that, we allow them 100%, why would I worry about 20 or 26%? But yeah, the voting right is an issue which sits squarely with the government.
Amendment to the act.
Yes, the Banking Company, the Banking Regulation Act. We've run out of time, not out of questions. I guess we can squeeze in a couple of questions from the audience, if that's okay. Yes, sir, please.
So, goodbye Washington Consensus by World Bank and Danny Roderick, the economist. It maybe gives certain indicators where a country before coming into economic crisis would face. Some of it were outflow on capital account reasons, premiumization of consumption, etc. So do you think India is anywhere into those parameters, and should India be worried?
No, I don't think India faces that situation at this point of time. I won't be worried about that. We are very comfortable in terms of growth, in terms of inflation, in terms of forex reserves. So right now the situation is not uncomfortable. So I won't worry about that.
I think none of our macros are in a dangerous spot at all. And even the BOP outflows was 22 billion in FY24 and in FY25. This year it may be about 5 billion or so. I mean, we have 650 billion even after counting the forwards. So we are not in that kind of a situation in terms of bad macros or anywhere near the Washington Consensus parameters. Well, I wanted a long discussion on, whether public sector banks should be brought under the Companies Act. It's one of my long-term asks, but that requires a separate discussion. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We are long run out of time.
Now I request Mr. Rajiv Anand, President Bombay Chamber, to please present the mementos to our speaker as a token of appreciation. For a group photo, please. One group photo. Yeah. Yes.